Welcome to another podcast of The Growth Game with Paul DeLuca. I'm the CEO of Meritus Capital. We are very happy to have Matt Massucci on today with us from Hirewell, another successful entrepreneur in the staffing space, and we're going to have a really nice conversation today. So Matt, great to get to know you, and thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Excited to be on.
Absolutely. Well, great. Well, so Matt, you and I really don't know each other real well, so I always like taking a couple of minutes just to make a quick introduction. Matt, if you haven't done too much research about me, I've been in the finance business specifically for staffing since the late 90s. I am not a banker. I started out as a specialty staffing person, and I sold that business when I was really young. Love entrepreneurs. I love helping entrepreneurs succeed. I love seeing families create wealth in the staffing sector has been my core expertise. So I've financed about 800 staffing companies over the years. Wow. And I still get up every day and love what I do. So I love helping people thrive. And this whole podcast is all about growth. I love growth. I love my clients growing. Most of our audience tunes in to be able to get little tidbits of what makes people like you tick, because really what it comes down to is that pattern matching. So I appreciate you jumping in, Matt, and love to hear a little bit about how you got into this business, how long you've been doing it, just a little bit about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you do have me beat. I feel like there's not too many that have been doing this longer than I have, Paul, but I think you have. So I got into recruiting, a little bit after you, but not too much. It's kind of the height of the .com days. Okay. Worked for a boutique firm, kind of going into the .com, rise and then fall. And that's when I started Hirewell, was back in 2001. So, my previous company had gone out of business. I'd love to say there's some, great backstory as to how and why I started, but, my old company went out of business and I had to do something. It was either move back in with mom and dad or, give it a shot on my own. So I did.
I love it.
Yeah. So, I think one thing that makes me a little bit unique, I didn't start in recruiting, which a lot of people in this business, that's kind of their first job out of school. I went to University of Illinois, studied accounting, was a CPA for a very, very brief moment of time, worked for, Arthur Andersen, which is no longer in business, moved over to Deloitte Consulting, realized that I was, a terrible accountant and not much of a consultant. And so I got into recruiting and it's been kind of an interesting journey to say the least, but it's been, it's an interesting, 20 plus years now.
Yeah, that's amazing. You know what I love about most of the stories that I have heard, for decades now, is that very few people plan and strategize to go into the staffing business. It's one of those things that just kind of happens, and a lot of people are able to create success and family wealth out of it, and good businesses that they're happy with. But that's great. Sometimes the absolute need to do something is what really gets you moving. So that's great. Good for you. Starting 2001. So you started in 2001. You've been on the talent scene in Chicago for many years. Tell us a little bit about your journey and some of the milestones you've faced.
Yeah. I mean, when we started, there were a couple of us that, had either worked together and or went to school together. So, the vision was always to disrupt the recruiting industry and do things a bit different. I think that the backstory on that is I remember kind of the final days of my old company, like, when it was on its last leg and business were going under left and right. There were the leaders of the firm, which, they were young in hindsight, but they seemed old to me at the time, in their mid 30s. They were guys who'd been at the big national firms and were now in this like leadership role. And, there's just no business to be had. It's about as dark of a time as I think that it could be in the staffing and recruiting world. And, I just remember them like just micromanage me, try to drive new business, try to do whatever I could to get revenue, which of course I was, 110% doing. But I was also kind of wondering, like, what are these guys doing? They're all they could talk about is how great they were. They're the number one person from Kforce and the number one person from Robert Half. Like, all right, great. Pick up the phone and get some business.
Let's produce some job orders.
Yeah, and it was just clear they couldn't. So that was always like, all right, like this industry is just a lot of people talking, not a lot of people delivering. The concept of the firm I was with was, it was a retained firm that I was in kind of what they're like their lower kind of whatever the mid market or their kind of middle tier branch, the more the volume hiring. I did like the concept of retainers, success fees, doing long-term work with clients. That was always sort of the premise with it. But, again, when you start a business, those early days, what you want to be versus what you are tend to be a pretty big difference. And so, early on, I was looking at it because I still have access to all the deals we did those first year or two. And, quite honestly, there weren't very many. So,
Yeah.
I think the first year, we did probably 40, 50K in revenue total. And in hindsight, all right, that's a rough time. But, early on, it took a while to get going. And then, as we progressed, we really were just a pure play tech recruiting firm. Again, the goal was always to do more, to be, kind of this complete talent solutions provider, but it took a long time. And so, it was all the way kind of to '08, '09, where, all right, we're just doing pure tech. But then that next, the Great Recession of that time period was sort of I'd say the first big inflection point for us, where we started to expand horizontally. We launched our HR recruiting practice, which was always kind of my vision to do, because my first firm had that offering, and being able to place heads of HR and heads of talent is just it's kind of a cheat code, honestly. Like when you're working with those folks, I love the opportunity to get in, and have those strategic conversations with those folks that you could cold call for 3 months long, but if you can help them find a job, they become some phenomenal people within your network. So, we launched that business around 2010. And then that's where we started to expand horizontally. So we progressed from being this pure play contingent tech recruiting and staffing firm to, aligning our functional expertise, and it has expanded a lot over these last, 10 or so years, where it's now tech, go to market, corporate function. Our corporate function practice consists of, F&A recruiting, HR recruiting, legal ops, and so that was kind of the first big switch. And then the next one is sort of what happened probably 7-8 years ago, where we started to do more, we call it managed recruiting, but it's really volume retained search, where you get, companies to engage with us. They need to hire, oftentimes the way it goes, they'll hire like a CTO. So they'll engage us for that, but then we'll help build the team around, him or her. So,
Right.
So they'll retain us for the C-level role plus, 15 to 20 follow-on hires. And, we become more of that kind of complete solution. That then evolved into more, it's effectively like our RPO business. We've called it on-demand recruiting, but you're able to embed yourself into their, talent acquisition department. In some cases, we run the whole thing if they don't want it to be a core competency and they want to outsource it to experts. Other times we, augment the existing one. So, so long story short, it's been a very, kind of roundabout, non-linear journey to go from this, contingent tech recruiting firm to this, firm that is able to do search in a variety of ways to, really where we are today, where, we want to be a complete, talent advisory and talent solutions provider.
Yeah, that's great. And so your journey really has been to start where you saw an opportunity, broaden out horizontally, and be able to create relationships that had key influencers within the organization that would continue to add more revenue to you, right? I love that strategy, whether you call it RPO or that pure solution provider, whether it's outsourced or kind of you're actually almost insourcing a portion of it, but you're hiring maybe that HR manager. I think that's a brilliant step forward, because it does has the opportunity, if cultivated right, to continue to keep that relationship, and then of course you're going to keep getting a lot more assignments. So that's excellent. Sounds like you've taken some of the challenges of each economic downturn and found a way to not only adapt but thrive. So good for you.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a pretty good way of putting it. Like I think being a Gen Xer, I've unfortunately been through more than my share of, recessions, and it's given me some gray hair, which I wish wasn't the case. But, you have to learn from it. And as you said, as painful it is to go through a down market, like the best thing that comes from it, and it's cliched and common sense, but it's what happens after that. And how do you use that to make the next big step in your journey? And we've been able to do that every single time. So again, first time it was expanding beyond tech. The next time it was really doing more, kind of outsourced and complete solutions. Coming out of COVID, was really where we 2.5x the size of the company. I mean, it was
brilliant.
A boom time in the market, where that's where, our on-demand recruiting took off. And and in this one, I mean, we're like, I know you can look at the numbers, and we're not in a recession right now, but I think anybody in the recruiting staffing world knows that it's probably closer to that than any of us want to talk about. It's I think
Right.
it's a natural sort of comeback from what happened over the previous years when when money was free and everybody was hiring and just didn't care about what the costs were.
Mhm.
And so, the latest one is really more that the advisory work is where we're, kind of the next piece we're getting into, where we just, we've helped companies hire so much, and great, they give us a role, we fill it, move on and hopefully fill a bunch more. But you're now recognizing these companies need more of a strategy with how they look at hiring and talent and things like that. And if we can advise them, like, all right, no, it's not hire everybody under the sun. It's how do you hire that kind of key, how do you make your budget, that you have, match the growth and kind of where you want to take your company to be, and not over invest in any areas, because everybody just has to be more efficient right now.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. And seeing the numbers, we finance obviously hundreds of companies right now, and I would say everybody is taking a bit of a wait and see attitude, right? Like like we're not seeing this called a recession, but it's definitely a time of reset.
Yeah.
And both internally in staffing firms as well as externally, people are resetting expectations and finding what that new normal looks like again after some very, very interesting economic times, from the prior 10 years with just so much growth and then leading into COVID. I think people are just kind of coming back with what's that normal now. Here's something you highlighted I really appreciate. And I've done this a lot over the years. I have always told my clients and my prospects the best time to reinvent yourself and or implement strategy that's going to really help you grow and grab market share is during the challenging tough times, because I find that's the time when most people are sticking their head in the sand. They're scared to do anything. They're scared to innovate. They're scared to make any changes because they're almost holding their breath. But that's the time where innovative people can adapt and grab market share. Sounds like you've done that almost each time. How have you kept that part of your, that innovation, that ability to look at the challenges and then be able to make, meaningful decisions to work through those? How do you handle that? How do you handle that method of staring at challenge and innovating?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's kind of two parts to it. Like, first off, as an entrepreneur, and I think most entrepreneurs are always looking for kind of that next idea, the next thing. And, it's a very fine line between chasing every shining object that's out there and, being able to focus on, ideas that you can build into, $1 million plus businesses. So, I always preface it with that, but like, I'm not afraid to have bad ideas. Like, not everything works, right? It's how do you like recognize, all right, this idea didn't work. How do we learn from it? How do we, iterate that into kind of the next thing to make it better and kind of more useful to get to the solution that works? I think the second thing, and really like why it's so beneficial at like in markets like this, is the access to talent is just like it is never before, right? Like,
Mhm.
I spend, if I think about kind of what my job is now as the CEO of Hirewell, leading the overall, like, kind of strategic vision and driving the growth. But like, some of that's driving clients, some of it's thinking of new business, opportunities and ideas. But honestly, the biggest thing is just recruiting people for our team. Like at the end of the day, I'm sure a few people in my organization will disagree, but I still think I'm the best recruiter here. And it just comes down to recruiting people for Hirewell versus our clients. And so,
Yeah.
I think of like, I'd love to say every bit of success that we've had is things I've done and what I've done, but ultimately it's been my ability or our ability to attract great people, give them the opportunity to grow, and to give them the opportunity to kind of build their own little business within what we built. And so like that's what like I get excited about it, and I know that we've already, like, I think about what's happened over the last year. Like we haven't hired a lot, but we've strategically brought on a handful of people, and they are going to be the folks that who really help us take that next step. And while 2023 was a down year for us, like the biggest takeaway is, all right, like we've had some people really step up internally. We've been able to bring on a couple of really great people that I think will be part of the next big growth, trajectory for us. And, and then we're getting the opportunity, to slowly expand into some new things.
I appreciate that. I know Steve Jobs was famous for saying that, the success of any organization is more about how you hire A players and keep A players together in a work group and self-police and get rid of the B and C players, right? And so whether that means that success internally, which you're building your own business by hiring those A players, it sounds like it's that talent, that ability to be able to attract and then hire and retain those A players that really is it's the difference between success and failure long term. And so, whether you're doing that for yourself internally or finding that same method or applying the same methods for your clients, it's still all about talent acquisition. So yeah, I really love that. What would you say are maybe two of the key things that our audience should think about when making a decision to stay pure play? Like, so you started out very focused in IT and recruiting in IT, and then you decided to grow horizontally. What are maybe some of the advantages and disadvantages of those two strategies? And maybe kind of like, what would you tell aspiring entrepreneurs to think about before they make that decision to stay pure play or grow horizontally?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, for us, it was, the reason we went horizontal was, the idea is, I believe, finding a great client is way harder than continually finding new ones, right? So if I have an excellent client, how do we become, sticky with them? How do we become this partner for them for, 5, 10 years? And, and you do that by helping them in other parts. You grow with them versus trying to continually find new clients. But, it's risky because you need, like the challenge we have is, we can fulfill on a lot. Like if you look at the way we're structured, when I talk about those three teams, is however an organization is structured, like we have the capabilities with people with pretty deep functional expertise to help them hire for that. But, a lot of companies are skeptical of that. Like, oh, wait, you're great at tech recruiting, but you also can hire salespeople. Nonsense. We want to hire, we want to bring on a boutique firm that's what they do. Well, no, the way we're structured is our teams are very, they're collaborative yet very siloed. So our people are experts in those areas. But there's a natural skepticism that we get, and we've done these things for 10 plus years each. So, I have started to see some firms try to go horizontal lately because for the first time ever, like tech hiring has slowed up. So I think these companies that have traditionally, like they've just been pure play tech recruiting firms, like, oh crap, we need to diversify. And,
Right.
good luck to them, but that's, really hard right now because like, is a company like, like our sales recruiting practice is booming right now, and like companies are hiring salespeople now. But like,
Right.
we can put a case study together that shows here's the, 15 companies we helped hire 25 people each last year. And we've done that for, 7 years in a row now. So like, we're confident in what we can do. We've got the track record and we've got these industry experts that can speak to it. So, that's a hard part. Like, so some of the diversification is, it was for us, it was almost like the path of least resistance with our existing client base. But but then listen, there's plenty of places who've been pure play and have grown way bigger than us. So there's advantages there. Again, for us, like the more common thing, I think, again, really before so many companies went heavy remote, was you'd expand into, we were heavy Chicago, but then these companies we're gonna open offices in New York, Boston, San Francisco, and you just want to replicate the model. And for me personally, like we were always so strong in Chicago because I knew we're remote now, but back when we were in an office, I knew we had 25 people that were some of the best recruiters around. And as we hired more people, just the learning, through osmosis of being around those phenomenal people, like you just can't replicate that. And sure, I could try to convince one of them to move to, Miami or Atlanta and open up Hirewell there. But are they going to be able to do it quite as well? Like probably not, I mean, just because it's harder. But again, that was sort of pre-remote, kind of everybody living everywhere. And now that has been kind of a big boon for us geographically, where we have been able to expand in new areas because we went from having 90% of our people in Chicago to probably 40%, and the rest are just throughout the country.
That's great. That's excellent. So really then, since every sector has its cycles and sometimes those are counter-cyclical, then would you say then one of the number one advantages is really de-risking, is really growing horizontal and having more sectors to serve also a big key in de-risking your overall revenue cycles? I can see that.
Yeah, it has. I mean, again, we've seen tech slow down kind of for the first time forever, and that was our our biggest focus for a long time. I mean, it's still our biggest area, but it's just not by, it's just not by as much as it used to be. And the flip side
Right.
is, like I said, sales has really picked up. And, we do have some other areas like, we do have two teams that are functionally aligned. One's our real estate construction services. And, I mean, the construction world is booming right now, right? There's a lot
Right.
happening there. That's probably, from what I've seen, other than healthcare, probably the strongest subset of the market. And, we kind of, I'd love to say like, strategically, like I made the decision 5 years ago to get into that. But, truthfully, I was approached by someone who wanted to join Hirewell, bring a team with them and build that practice for us. And, Jim has done that. He's done a phenomenal job. But, like that's, again, it's sometimes better to be, lucky than good when it comes to stuff like that. But so that's been a good one. The other is our, industrial practice, which, I guess formerly we called it supply chain, but it's really helping companies, and there's obviously, and those things are, tied together, like obviously the onshoring of the supply chain and kind of more hiring there. And, that's really the most competitive part of the market. And we, we got into that probably 4 years ago, a little bit more by accident, but then we recognized, hey, this is a booming thing. And, we can be effective here. Now we're not doing like the hourly light industrial staffing that I think is most common, but it is providing like more like talent solutions to these organizations. And it could be through our like RPO services where we'll assign a recruiter to help them hire 30, 50, 100 or something at a location, or we'll help them with kind of very key specific roles. But, that's a subset of the market that's strong. And so, yeah, it's been a boon, and it's helped us. So.
Yeah, that's great. How intrinsic do you think that having a real RPO solution, really something that is much more of a solution sell? Because when people say RPO, there's a lot of different flavors of it, right? But how intrinsic is having an effective offering that really is more solution based, a real RPO solution for staffing and recruiting firms long term, in your opinion?
So, it's interesting. That was probably the last thing that we added. We've always considered ourselves a solutions provider. We want to not be transactional. It doesn't mean, sometimes it is, a company needs to hire one thing and, that is a bit transactional by nature. But, the goal is to be more strategic, to be able to sit down with leadership and understand where they're trying to go over the next 12 to 18 months, and come up with a solution that fits. And, paying, bringing on a bunch of contractors or interim talent all that time is not necessarily the right answer. Or paying fees, contingent fees for all of those is just not going to happen. Companies don't want to spend that kind of money. So having something that sort of sits in that world, and and I think that's going to be the next change in hiring and talent acquisition. Like we've seen such a roller coaster over the last 4 or 5 years, like ramping up, down, up, back down again. And I'm hopeful companies will be a little bit smarter this time around. Like, do you really need, like a 15-person in-house TA team because you think you're going to hire, and then are you just going to fire them all in a year or two when you're done hiring? So I think like flexible solutions are going to be important. We've learned some lessons on the RPO side over the last few years that it is tough. Like, you do want, like for our executive search arm, we've got a massive contract with a global consulting firm where, yes, for 5 years, they've engaged us for all of their, band 3 and above hiring. And so like, that's great. Obviously I'd love to do that at all of our clients, but that's, that thing took 7 years to sell, so
that's a long sales cycle in this business. 7-year sales cycle, but you did it.
Well, yeah, it wasn't like it went from zero to all of that.
Like,
of
course.
You ramp it up and you start, you start kind of onesie twosie, and then you upsell it, but that's tough to do. And quite honestly, not everybody in this business can, but I think that's what we like, that's been our other big focus area over the last year is training our people to be more solutions oriented, able to sell a variety of things across the whole sort of the suite of solutions that, that Hirewell offers. And that's been a huge, like when I think of like how we've been able to attract talent, like that's usually kind of like the number one thing is people come here, like, yes, I'm proud of the culture. Everybody says they've got a great culture. Like I do believe it, but we've got a great culture, we've got great people, but then we give people the ability to truly maximize their network and not just sell one thing to them. And so like we did a small acquisition of a group out in San Francisco last year. And Tom, the founder and CEO, like, he had approached me 6 8 months prior, because all he was doing was sales recruiting for tech
Hmm.
companies in the Bay, and
Yeah.
that was a phenomenal business that slowed down obviously with when things slow down. But
Right.
he liked what we were doing, and he said, "Hey, I've got this great network. They're not hiring a lot of salespeople right now, but like I'd love to be able to sell them, help them, find marketing people, help them find tech
Right.
people, help them find,
Nice.
recruiters and HR people." And
Hmm.
yeah, and it's been booming. I mean,
Sounds
he
like some
took it
great
out.
synergy.
Yeah,
So you
yeah,
acquired that company or brought him into the business?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
great. That's
yeah.
great. And then be able to
It
use
was,
those synergies
it
to
was
grow out.
small.
Yeah.
It was a couple of people, but like
Yeah.
that'll be like the ability to do that is exciting, and I think that's what's going to
Right.
continue to happen.
That's great. Do you do any contract or any temporary or contract or temp to perm, or is it
Yeah,
pure
we
recruiting?
do, and like we call that our interim
Hmm.
offering. Now
Hmm.
it's not. I think the way we're structured differently than most firms. Like a lot of companies, either that's all they do, or if they do it, it's separated. They have like a temp group and a
Right.
direct hire group. Like we don't do it that way. Like I mean, the two areas we really do this the most are tech and HR and corporate function, where like our team is just like, again, they're like, some people are better at it than others or do a little bit more of it than others. But like the idea is you're finding tech folks, whether it's, if FTEs or people on, interim or project basis, like we're able to do it. It's for us, it's, I think we peaked probably about 125
Mhm.
consultants out in the field. I think it's down,
Got it.
a little bit from there, but it's
Yeah.
been pretty steady. And that's, I think,
Yeah.
been another
That's
nice
great.
thing where, again, it's just it's a little bit of like the diversification. Like if like, I mean, whatever, we all, I've both been in this a long time. Like what's kind of like anything that's a little bit, like the contract or interim stuff is, hit first in a slowdown, usually spikes first in a rebound, and
Yeah.
it's nice to have that diversification.
Yeah, I love the diversification. It's something that I try to tell people, recruiters to do a lot of because and of course that's what we finance primarily is we finance the payroll to allow recruiting firms to really grow their temp side of their business, their contract side, and it's in every sector you can imagine. But I really love the fact that it does seem to build a more easily definable enterprise value long term. And I think I also love the fact that it does even out some of the cycles. And so it seems to work really well. But I've seen most of the success come from making sure that they are still built together. Right? That the offering isn't so separate and different that it's a different sales cycle. Because I find that hiring managers, when they realize the optionality, do tend to be able to, and when that optionality is just intrinsic in the offering, it seems to be something that grows really well. So that's great. It's nice to see again you took that other step to diversify, and I absolutely believe strongly that that's an excellent decision for you. What scares you about growth, Matt?
What scares me about growth, it's just the unknown. Can we handle it? Can we keep up? And is it going to be sustainable? I think that's like, if I look at it in hindsight, like what's happened over the last, 2 3 years, like we grew exponentially. And unfortunately, like a lot of places, we probably grew faster than we should have. And there wasn't necessarily the business to keep up with that. So that's been painful. But,
Mhm.
I think like, it's I mean, it's obviously what is kind of exhilarating and exciting about all of
Well,
this.
that's
And
the other thing. My next question is what excites you about growth? And it's so funny how real entrepreneurs, the two things are so intricately linked. That's why I always love asking that question together because what scares you almost inevitably for entrepreneurs is also the excitement. We
right.
can't help but look at things and not say, hey, we want to fix them. But so what is it? What excites you? What makes you wake up early in the morning and be like, all right, I'm going to try to drive growth?
Yeah, it's just exactly that. Like, listen, I mean, I think any entrepreneur like just hates the thought of failure, and whatever, failure might seem harsh, but I think for me, lack of success is failure. So,
Yeah,
all right,
agreed.
like, and that's been, like I think some of the challenges of the last year and a half is like they haven't gone. We went pretty much, up into the right for, for 15 years, and to have like a little bit of a step back, sucks, for lack of a better way to
Hmm.
put it. And
Right.
so, all right, great. Like, you don't want that to define you. Like, how do you adapt, evolve, and then kind of come out on the side better, and and just continue that path. And I think it's hard when you're in the moment, and I like, you you want it to just be slightly easier than it is right now. Now, again, this business is never easy, right? Like if it's, I think about kind of how it was in 2021 and 2022 when things were growing like crazy. Like it was a different world.
Right.
Like the stresses then, like, I mean, we were turning away clients because we just couldn't help them, and like, it was purely like a bandwidth thing, which, you hate doing, but like, we don't want to we don't want to compromise service and quality.
Right.
And, now it's the flip side. We're like, all right, like it's softer than we'd like it to be. It'll get better, but you kind of have to get back to the basics. And I think that's been the hard part. Like, again, having done it for over 20 years, like, like the things I was taught back in the late 90s, like, I mean, as cliched and kind of sometimes cheesy as they seemed at the time, like they were right, and so we try to take a different spin, a different approach on it, but it's just like, how do you, like our big focus is it's relationships right now. Like, I think that's the biggest challenge.
No doubt.
Is like, it's impossible to get people on the phone. Email is a disaster, right? Like, just
total
like
disaster.
Like, I mean, how much crap I get, like that's just spam or AI or automation generated. So like,
how much LinkedIn spam do you get? Right? Like it's so. But I love what you're saying, and it sounds like you're focusing in on something that what's exciting about growth, especially in our business, is that it still is a people business.
Yeah,
that's what I think. I love it. It's this business attracts people that really understand that talent and the human element is so important, and being, sometimes it's hard to start those relationships, but just being able to cultivate those relationships and see, success together, really, right? That's it's enjoyable. That's what keeps us going.
Yeah. It's funny. We've done a lot of training over the last 6 months in cultivating contacts, is what we call this latest iteration. And I did it. I wanted to just lead by example. Like, listen, and it's sort of back to the story I told before, like with the top people in my old firm, like them being unable to drive business in a challenging market. Like, I take it on myself. Like, listen, I've done this longer than any of you. Like, if I can't help us sell our way out of it, what am I doing? So now, admittedly, like I'm not the most organized. So I had to like talk to some of the folks on our team who are better with organization and sort of systems. Yeah. So we built out a training system that I think will be helpful. And I kicked it off in January, and it's been helpful, just doing more meetings, getting in front of people, just utilizing my relationships, my network, expanding it. And it's paying off. So it's been exciting.
That's great. Yeah. And I find that, you have to lead by example. And, when I feel the same way, if as a selling CEO, if I'm not willing to get on the phone and try and get outbound and talk to people and get in front of them, it creates a negative atmosphere. It's one thing I think my employees really appreciate about me is that, I have no problem jumping on a call and communicating to a prospect. It was funny. I had a call the other day with one of my salespeople. We were going through their pipeline. My employee was like, I just cannot get this guy. It's been 5 or 6 times. It just never works. And, I was like, what, let's just try. I said, what, let me just give it a try. I'm going to give, see if I can dial and get this guy. Of course, first dial, he picks up. He was absolutely thrilled to hear from us. He said, absolutely, I'm ready to move forward, but of course my salesperson after jaw dropped because thankfully I had him on Teams. I could actually see him. But you know what? It encourages them to realize, there's nothing wrong with just pushing to try to create the relationship. And that's where thankfully our business is still a people business.
Yep.
It hasn't been automated away. So let me ask you a question, like, maybe do you have an unpopular or a counterintuitive prediction for the staffing industry? Is there something about where you think this industry is going that you think is a bit unique or unpopular with people you speak to?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, unique or unpopular, I don't know. I mean, like, automation's coming, as you said, it's not going to go away. I mean, I remember back in the 90s thinking that like monster.com and career builder were going to put recruiting out of business. It hasn't happened. LinkedIn was supposed to do that. Didn't happen. But listen, automation is going to change it, and it's going to it's going to render a lot of people obsolete if they don't up their game and just do it better. Because if all you're doing is reaching out to folks that are open to work on LinkedIn or just in your database and you're not having meaningful conversations, you're not understanding who they are, what they care about, and understanding how they fit your clients' needs, those are the people who are going to struggle. And so I think, and that doesn't just apply to recruiting firms or staffing agencies. It's everybody in recruiting and talent. Like you just,
Yeah.
Do you want to work hard? Do you want to like do what it takes to be successful and to be great at that? And again, that can happen in so many different like environments. It can happen at a firm like Hirewell. It can happen in the corporate world. Like, it'll be interesting. Like I do like, I think like the gig or fractional concept is a little bit like overplayed, but I think it's for real and it's not going away. You know what I mean? It's just it's like how and where and the way people work. Like again, like the concept of taking a full-time job that realistically, the average shelf life of a corporate recruiter is 18 months, right? Like, and that's for a variety of reasons, and so like, all right, you can be a full-time employee, but like, is that like, what's that mean exactly? Like odds are you're going to leave in 12 to 18 months, then either they stop hiring or you find something more interesting. So like, I think just, kind of rethinking just like the, how work actually happens and where it happens and kind of the relationship will be the interesting thing that plays out. So
I like that. I think that it seems like people approach this industry. Very few approach somewhere in the middle. Either they approach it, they think of the future as being a very automated world where almost this whole solution set happens without a lot of human interaction. And then the opposite say, you know what, technology is just not going to help here. This is a people business, and it's always going to take people. And I agree with you. I think it's really the people that can blend those two things that realize that we have to use these tools to be productive. Like, these things we thought were going to completely change the industry. No, they just made it, for the people who know how to use them, made things more productive, right? And yet there will definitely be a place for significant usage of technology, but it isn't going to completely get rid of. It's going to evolve our work, but you have to have a tech strategy, but otherwise you will be left behind. But it's also not going to happen overnight. And let's face it, I think it's the same thing we saw in the .com bust. Over enthusiasm and the near term impact is over emphasized and expected to make too much near-term change. But what most people do is underestimate the long-term effects, right? And so the ability to kind of finesse that in your decision-making, knowing that you will have some near-term impacts, but likely you're underestimating the long-term, and try to make sure that you find that middle ground is important, I think, for any CEO.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. As the CEO of Hirewell, how would you describe your leadership philosophy?
That's a good question. I do try to lead by example. I try to be collaborative. Like I think if you may get kind of, mixed. I think the first one people would agree with. I think the second one, it's like, it depends, and I think it's like a lot of it is, I get hands-on when like I feel it's necessary. And I think like, unfortunately, with sort of the challenges we've had over the last year, like it's been more necessary, right? And so, again, like I do listen, I take ideas. I think I know I'm not perfect. I know I don't do everything, like in a, perfect every time. So I do want to be open to feedback. And, and I think like the hard part as an entrepreneur, like none of us, like, sure, there are like the quote unquote serial entrepreneurs, but like most of us, like you're just kind of learning as you're going. So like, like you're going to make mistakes. Like I'm not afraid of it. Like I've made plenty. Like I wish I didn't, but it's just kind of how life goes. So,
yeah,
so I don't know.
I like that. Lead by example, collaborative, but decisive. Right? Like, it sounds to me like what you're saying, and it's very similar to my philosophy. It's, I'm very open, I am very collaborative, and I tend to be, very, very much lead by example. But sometimes the leaders by example, which means you're not afraid to get your hands dirty and get in there. We also are the ones that are decisive CEOs, right? So if we see something we need to pivot, boy, we're going to pivot, and we appreciate the advice and help and counsel, but we're going to decisively push towards a solution. I don't know.
Yeah.
My next question was going to be how your employees would describe you, and you kind of wrapped that in. So I love that, because sometimes we see ourselves differently, right?
I think they'd agree with the first two. The decisive might, I'm decisive, I sometimes take a little too long to become decisive, if that makes
Got
sense.
it.
You know, and listen, I mean, it's all fluid, like things change. And so
Right.
like, I mean, again, I don't want to appear wishy-washy, but like what worked
Mm-hmm.
6 months ago, like you have to constantly be forward thinking. You can't live with
Yep.
what got you to 6 months ago. It could work forever, but oftentimes it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what you have to, you have to kind of evolve with. And I think that's where like, I think it can come across as wishy-washy. Well, oh, you said this
Okay.
before. You thought, you said this before. And yeah, I did. And like I
I
said,
did.
like, but like
That's why we have to
the
pivot.
yeah, the world changed in the last 6 months, and
Yeah.
like what worked six
Right.
months ago is not working now. So
Yeah. Agreed.
so
Agreed. That's that's great. No, I get it. It's this commitment to continue to adapt and keep going. That's really what so many successful CEOs. If you want to pattern match a successful CEO, that's that ability to continue to adapt and be open, but execute on what your gut really tells you need to do, and not be afraid to say, that just didn't work.
yeah.
Change it and start over. Let me ask your advice for our audience. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages to bootstrapping your business from a financial perspective and having slower growth, as opposed to acquiring financing to accelerate your growth?
Listen, we were bootstrapped for the first 20 years or so. It's going to be slower. I shouldn't say it's going to be. It doesn't have to be, but in my case, it was. I looked at places like that. It started around the same time that ended up being 5-10x our size, but then having, taken, we did take some outside investment 2 years ago, and the world changes then, right? Where it's, like you're not your own boss anymore. You have other people you need to listen to, and that can be great sometimes and not great others. And so like, what do you want? Like, what's most important? Like, you can't have it all. Like, I mean, sure. Like I'd
Right.
love to, I'd love to have started, Facebook or Meta and be worth all that money, but that wasn't going to happen. So like with my skill set, like how do you get to where you want to be? And like you have to give and take. And so like it's to have to achieve success is tricky. Like for me, like I mean, to go from being one, as I said, when I started, I had a few other people that were with me, and that was hugely advantageous for those first 8 to 10 years. Because if you're just by yourself, it's really hard to scale kind of a recruiting and staffing business. And it was like those first 5 to 7 years, it's really hard to bring on good people. You have to get a little bit lucky, So like for me, it was kind of like the inflection points of like how do you get that critical mass of 5 really good people, then 10 really good people, then 25 really good people, then 50 really good people. And for that was the key thing. And sometimes it is taking outside funding or cash to sort of expedite that. But, to be careful what you wish for, because if you do that, like then, like you're beholden to someone else and, it's not your decision all the time. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to do it for a purpose that matches your own ambition, right? There's nothing wrong with succeeding at your level of ambition, and you have to make that decision. What does that look like for me as a CEO and entrepreneur? And then align that with the capital and align that with your plans, your timing. How long do you really want this to take? So maybe that's for the last question. What would you say is your most valuable lesson learned that was really not fun while you were going through it? You were going through it and it was like, wow, this is just not so fun. But it developed into something that is a valuable life lesson.
There's a bunch, so I'm trying to think of which one. I'm going to go back to the very early days of just like how hard it was those first couple of years. Like, oh my God, like I don't know if this is going to work out. And like, again, it's sort of that like, that fear of failure and kind of fear of not being successful is a tremendous motivator. At least it has been for me.
Right.
So, back then it's just like, all right, you got to just keep getting after it and get a little lucky and kind of put yourself in the right spot. And, for us, like it was kind of just that one big client. And it was actually, it was staffing back when, honestly, I didn't know factoring existed back then, and it probably wasn't helpful. It was super stressful to try to self-fund a project where you put out 25 consultants, and payroll was really tight back then. I was running payroll.
We should have known each other, Matt, because I could have taken it from 25 to 1,000. No, that's good, but that's a stressful thing. I talk to people all the time, not knowing if you're going to make payroll that week. Ouch, that's tough. But you got through it.
Yeah, and so, but just like finally, like getting to the point of like all right, am I crazy? Is this thing ever going to work out? And then, all right, this
Yeah.
is a real business. And then now, great, now we go. So it just
Yeah.
takes
I
longer
love
when
it.
you want it to. So
I love it. Yeah. I look back at those early days, the same thing. That stick-to-itiveness is the only way you can really look at it, because sometimes those first few years can absolutely be dreary, and you're just like, boy, am I actually, am I ever going to really be able to put this together? We were really starting our companies around the same time. I mean, I really transitioned out of my staffing company into the finance business late 90s, so about 98, 99, but I really started getting after it right around late 99. And so, yeah, those first 2, 3 years, I don't know how many times I said to myself, I just don't know if I can do this, or had opportunities to go back into the family business, and my mom just found a letter that I had written to my father at the time, because my father was trying desperately to recruit me back into the family company that he had since the 60s. I wrote a letter about, literally how hard this is, but this is something I have to do for me to stick to it and become successful in this.
yeah,
And
that's great.
and it's boy, I tell you, you reflect back when you're going through it, you don't think you can get through it. But if you just stick to it and deal with the real challenges, I think there can be a lot more successes that get to a place to where we've got, good careers that we appreciate. So,
Yeah.
Matt, it's been fantastic talking with you today on the growth game. It sounds like you've been through many cycles of decisions and growth over the years. Really happy to see your successes and love to continue to watch you be ultra successful. Love to continue to know you over the years and be able to root for your success. And really, really do appreciate your time today.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Paul. It was fun. It was great to talk to you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, Matt, have a great one. And until next time, this is Paul DeLuca, CEO of Meritus Capital on the growth game. We really appreciate Matt Massucci being on today from Hirewell, and we appreciate his wisdom and experience in the business. And hopefully we got some really great tidbits of things that will keep us growing our businesses and enjoying it while we do it. So until next time, this is Paul from the growth game.